The well-documented North American video game crash of 1983 gave rise to the equally discussed arrival of Nintendo as a major player in the Western home console market. Taking notes from the failures of competitors like Atari, the nearly century-old company packaged the NES's launch lineup very simply, showcasing little more than the game's title, genre, and an accurate representation of what kind of visuals the player could reasonably expect from the product. Among collectors, these 30 titles are now referred to as the Black Box series and feature classics like Super Mario Bros., Duck Hunt, and Donkey Kong. Alongside these stalwarts of vintage gaming, the lineup also contains such simply titled releases as Golf, Pinball, and Balloon Fight. It seems that for many of these early games, both the artwork and name were reflective of the "what you see is what you get" marketing mentality. At a glance, it would appear that only one game in the set is based on a previously existing intellectual property, not including arcade ports: Popeye, a tie-in for the comic strip and animated cartoon of the same name. However, you might be surprised to hear that one of those black box games with the almost painfully generic and unassuming titles was actually released as a licensed game alongside a classic Hong Kong martial arts film. But that's not all. It was also developed as a tie-in for another, completely unrelated Hong Kong martial arts film, to which it still bears the most striking similarities, in my opinion. So join me on this episode of From Camera to Console, where I dive into one game based on two totally different movies, and see if I can make heads or tails of the whole thing. Let's take a look at Kung Fu for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, Yuen Biao. Unless you're already familiar with Hong Kong action cinema, you probably only recognize one of those names. But throughout the 1980s, this trio of childhood friends was responsible for some of the most notable martial arts comedies ever produced. After working together on the Chan-directed Project A in 1983, the team would reunite the following year for a film helmed by Hung. Because the so-called brothers were already so famous at that point, it was practically impossible to shoot in public places in their home country. But thankfully, legendary martial artist Bruce Lee had paved the way for Hong Kong productions to go abroad with his 1972 movie, The Way of the Dragon, which was partially shot in Italy. So, Hung and company took the cast and crew to Spain, where they filmed Wheels on Meals. In the movie, Chan and Biao play Thomas and David respectively, two cousins who own a food truck in Barcelona. While visiting David's father at a mental health facility, they meet Sylvia, the gorgeous daughter of the woman he is dating. The pair becomes infatuated with the beauty, only to learn that she is a pickpocket who soon robs them blind after they invite her to their apartment. The cousins then encounter a bumbling private detective named Moby, played by Sammo Hung, who is tracking Sylvia. When the trio discovers that a vicious gang led by Sylvia's uncle is after her inheritance money, they decide to team up and rescue the young heiress. Between the film's intricately choreographed and blindingly fast-paced action sequences, the movie features humorous dialogue and physical comedy like that of Abbott and Costello or the Marx Brothers.
Hold it. Got a magnet anywhere?
Magnet? What do you want that for?
I tie a piece of string to it.
Why would you tie a piece of string to a magnet?
I would then lower the magnet down the gutter.
You been drinking?
No?
Well, what's the idea of lowering a magnet down into the gutter, huh?
Well, I thought I could salvage the nuts.
They don't keep the nuts down there.
Well...
Huh? It's our wheel nuts, you mean?
You got it first time.
While much of the Cantonese wordplay was likely weakened by the localization process or completely lost on an English-speaking audience, the rip-roaring fight scenes communicate in the universal language of violence. While many of the encounters ascribe to the Jackie Chan school of less gratuitous, acrobatics-focused, largely bloodless scuffles, one heavy-hitting matchup between Chan and pro kickboxing champion Benny the Jet Urquidez brings a considerable weight to the film's climactic rescue sequence, and is understandably considered by many to be one of the best on-screen bouts of martial arts in movie history. The film was not only a success in its Hong Kong home, but all over East Asia, claiming top 10 yearly box office spots in Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. The Land of the Rising Sun saw the movie released under a different title, Spartan X. Video game developer IREM produced a movie tie-in of the same name for arcades that came out alongside the film in 1984, and is widely considered to be the first ever entry in the beat-em-up genre. Because the game bore no other resemblance to the film than the character names of Thomas and Sylvia, distributing the cabinet abroad was as simple as changing the title, and that's exactly what they did. The machine was exported under the name Kung Fu Master, and interestingly came full circle back to movies as it went on to inspire a plot point as well as the English title of Agnes Varda's 1988 film Le Petit Amour. In 1985, Nintendo released their in-house developed port of Spartan X for the Famicom, and just like the arcade version, removed any indication of its cinematic origins for the NES release with the further simplified title, Kung Fu. Today, we'll be looking at that version of the game. In the game, the player takes control of Jackie Chan's character Thomas as he fights his way through 5 floors of enemies, each level ending with a boss encounter. After clearing the second floor, the game objective is revealed. Rescue Sylvia from the clutches of someone named Mr. X, who I guess is supposed to be a stand-in for the gang leader named Mondale in the film. The player has only Thomas's fists and feet with which to defend themselves, and the controls could not be more simple. The D-pad makes Thomas move and jump, and if you press the A button, he punches. If you press the B button, he kicks. It even says so in the instruction manual. The heads-up display features a variety of useful information including current score, top score, lives remaining, time remaining, and life meters for both Thomas and the stage boss, just like in Castlevania. It even tells you which floor you're on. Convenient! The basic enemy type is the Gripper, which will latch onto Thomas, restricting his movement and draining his life meter. Eventually, the player will encounter the Knife Thrower who, you guessed it, throws knives. The next enemies you'll face are the Tomtoms, which are... children? Anyway, they like to jump and attack. Thomas will also face a number of animal enemies, including a flying venomous moth, snakes that appear from falling baskets, and fire-breathing dragons that emerge from... let's check the manual here. Ah yes, Dragon Balls. The 5 featured floor bosses include the aptly named Stick Fighter and Boomerang Fighter. Guess what they do? The 3rd and 4th bosses are the Giant and the Black Magician respectively, followed by the gang leader, the bafflingly named Mr. X. Each enemy dispatched will award the player with a number of points that is occasionally dependent on how the opponent was defeated, with punches, kicks, or a jumping attack. At the end of a stage, all remaining time and health are calculated into the player's score and will earn them an extra life at every 50,000 point benchmark. Once all 5 floors are cleared, Mr. X is defeated and Sylvia is rescued, Thomas and his would-be girlfriend are only briefly reunited before the game starts all over again, the dragon icon in the HUD displaying the number 1 for how many times the game has been completed. Kung Fu features an alternating 2-player mode in which I suppose one can pretend that the second player is controlling Thomas's cousin David. There's also a game mode B that is for expert players, according to the manual. Kung Fu is fun for what it is, which is a rudimentary action game that's surprisingly true to the original arcade version. The gameplay is actually a bit faster and more responsive than in the arcade, although the graphics are simplified for the less powerful home console. I do prefer this to the arcade overall, though. The music and sound effects are nothing all that special, save for a bit of voice synthesization with Thomas's battle cries and Mr. X's evil laughter. I only wish there was some variety in the levels, because they all look exactly the same after the ground floor of this pagoda. Pagoda? Where is this exactly? There's no pagoda in Wheels on Meals. The movie takes place in Spain. Who are these enemies supposed to be? They're dressed in gi like martial artists, but the bad guys in the movie are all gangsters and bikers. What exactly is going on here? Well, as it turns out, Kung Fu, aka Kung Fu Master, aka Spartan X, was not always supposed to be a movie tie-in for Wheels on Meals. The project actually began development as a game based on The Game of Death, an incomplete film starring and written and directed by Bruce Lee. Production on the movie occurred in late summer and early fall of 1972 and was put on hold when Lee was offered the lead in Enter the Dragon, the first ever Hollywood-produced martial arts film. Unfortunately, Bruce Lee tragically died before the film's release and was never able to resume production on The Game of Death. Several years later, Enter the Dragon director Robert Clouse was approached about completing a version of what would ultimately be Lee's final film role. And in 1978, 5 years after Lee's passing, the world got to see the legend on screen one last time in Clouse's Game of Death. In the movie, Lee, along with a handful of body doubles, plays Billy Lowe, an international martial arts movie star who runs afoul of a gang who wants to extort Lowe and his pop singer girlfriend. When Billy resists the mobster's intimidation attempts, they try to assassinate the actor in a scene eerily prescient of the manner in which Bruce Lee's son Brandon was killed while making 1994's The Crow. In the scene, mob underling Stick, played by Mel Novak, appears on the set of Billy's movie to be among a group of extras who must shoot Billy with blanks.
Gentlemen, these are blanks. Only aim upward. There's a wad of paper that comes out and can injure someone.
Stick, of course, replaces his blank with a real bullet for the assassination attempt, but for those who know how Brandon Lee died, this appears to be a very creepy coincidence, as he was killed on set by a mishap involving a blank. Billy survives the attempt on his life and uses the opportunity to fake his own death and take on the gang in secret. But the syndicate soon realizes that Billy is still alive and takes his girlfriend hostage. The movie star then climbs the top 3 floors of a restaurant from which the mob operates and takes down the bad guys one by one. Robert Clouse's Game of Death is a bit of a tough watch. Although Lee reportedly shot over 100 minutes of footage before production was put on hold, only 11 minutes and 7 seconds of the original film made it into the revised version. The older footage stands out like a sore thumb, as Clouse's film stock was clearly of higher quality than what Lee was shooting on. That said, the movie he made was likely not of higher quality from a narrative or action standpoint. Cutaways to close-ups of Lee from previous films are painfully obvious, as well as the abundant use of large sunglasses, fake beards, shadows, and rain to cover up Lee's stand-ins. The use of a still cutout of Lee's face in one scene is among the most egregious and infamous attempts to make up for his absence. If that wasn't bad enough, the filmmakers chose to use real footage from Lee's funeral for Billy's fake death, even going so far as to use a brief shot of the actor's actual corpse in the coffin. If the lackluster action, constantly shifting film quality, and poor attempts to work around the missing Lee weren't enough to turn you off to this film, the funeral scene might be the final straw. That said, there's a moment toward the end of the film when Lee climbs the stairs of the restaurant and the movie shifts to mostly original footage shot by Lee in 1972, noticeable due to its different quality. Lee enters the room, his face unobscured, and gives us a glimpse at the movie that could have been. And let me tell you, it is electrifying. The entire mood of the film changes, and what previously felt like a despicable cash grab in the wake of Lee's untimely death all falls away in a showcase of how the man became the legend that he is. The fight with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in particular is an unquestionable highlight of Lee's career, and I can't help but feel that Game of Death deserves some recognition for bringing even a taste of his final role to audiences and fans. But how similar is it to the game? Well, it's a little closer than Wheels on Meals is, but there are still a few question marks. The intro to the arcade version refers to the primary location as the Devil's Temple, which is present in neither film. So what was IREM basing their game on during development if the final product resembles neither movie in a significant way? It seems as though the developer was looking to Lee's original plot for his version of the Game of Death for their inspiration. Lee was to play a retired martial arts champion who is challenged by Korean gangs to retrieve some unknown precious item from the top floor of a 5-level pagoda, each floor being protected by a guardian using a unique fighting style. And right there, you already have a premise that reflects the game experience to a T. While I doubt there were ever supposed to be fire-breathing dragons in Lee's film, given the star's nickname and the fact that one of the floors in the original script was to be called the Temple of the Dragon, these enemy types only appearing on one level seems to be more than happenstance. The first floor stick fighter boss seems awfully similar to the first fighter Billy Lowe encounters in Clouse's Game of Death, and it can't be a coincidence that the third floor giant has a darker skin tone than any other character in the game. Even the voice synthesization when the player attacks sounds much more like Bruce Lee's famous high-pitched vocalizations than Jackie Chan's. Well, there you have it, the strangest and most complicated history of a movie license game I've yet covered on From Camera to Console. The game was eventually ported to everything from Atari's 2600 and 7800 consoles to various computer systems including the Apple II, Commodore 64, and ZX Spectrum. Even the Game Boy got its own completely retooled release featuring bosses clearly inspired by Jason of the Friday the 13th series and the man responsible for the game's earliest inspiration, Bruce Lee. Although a simple game with a strange backstory, Kung Fu's legacy cannot be denied. Takashi Nishiyama of Capcom once said that the boss encounters in Spartan X could even be credited with being the basis for the whole idea of Street Fighter. As you can see, it's pretty clear that IREM changed very little once they decided to release the game as a tie-in for Wheels on Meals instead of Game of Death. Something as simple as Kung Fu doesn't need much to reflect the spirit of its inspiration, but its lack of similarity to the film it was actually marketed with is pretty notable, considering it was sold abroad with literally no changes other than its title. Had Lee's The Game of Death actually come to fruition as he envisioned it, and this game was a full-on adaptation as it nearly is already, I doubt stripping it of its core intellectual property would have been quite so simple. But now that's got me thinking about what a ROM hack of this could look like. Take out the Wheels on Meals cutscenes, shuffle the bosses so that they're in the correct order, add some visual variety to the stages, and of course, put the player character in that iconic yellow jumpsuit. I'd call it Bruce Lee's The Game of Death, and you can have that idea for free. Get to it, modders.